Now we are recording. So, Henry, it's great that you could join us tonight. Maybe you could say a little bit about your own personal history, where you grew up, what's like growing up there, how many people in your immediate family, things like that.
All right. Well, I grew up in Washington, D.C., off of Minnesota Avenue. In the house, I grew up with my mother, my father, two sisters, and my brother, but he didn't stay there long. Probably when I was around 6, 7, maybe, that's when he moved out. I was pretty young when he moved out, so I didn't really grow up with him like that per se. As a point of reference, they're not my biological family, but they are the family that raised me, so I do consider them just as much as my mother and father and sisters and brothers.
So were you adopted by this family?
Correct. I was adopted by them. They knew my mother.
I see.
My mother was friends with their children. So, she wasn't someone that was unknown to the family per se, but she got caught up in drug addiction and just battling her own demons. And there was no way that she could have raised a child. She had no resources to do so. As a matter of fact, my biological mother has at least 10 children.
I see. Wow. And is she still living?
That I don't know. I have not spoken with my biological mother in many, many years. I've tried a couple of times to reach out to the people that I may know about her whereabouts, but no one's really sure where she is.
Oh, I see. And did you ever know your father, your biological father?
No, I did not. I did inquire about him and found out a couple of things about him, such as his name, where he was from, but that was really about it. I have no idea what he looks like, whether he's alive or dead, and so.
And is Goldberg the name of your biological father? Is that where?
To the best of my knowledge, that was the information given to me.
I see. Okay. And what kind of education did you get here in the district?
A mixture of public, private, and charter school education. I started off in public school and elementary, private school, Catholic private school for middle school, and charter school for high school.
I see. And how were those experiences for you?
Interesting in many different ways. When I was in elementary school, and I'll just be frank, I went to a predominantly Black, elementary school, I'm sorry. And so really, I was the only person my skin tone there. And even though I knew for a fact that my biological mother was Black, I wouldn't say I got picked on, but people just thought I was white.
Interesting.
So it kind of caused me to put my foot down, verbally and physically sometimes. That was something that my family always reiterated to me was, never let anyone step on you, don't get bullied. So that's how I kind of started. By the time I got to middle school, what was seen like a negative in elementary was now a positive because, once again, I was the only person my complexion, but I guess that was kind of in back then. And I had a lot of attention from the girls. So middle school was a pretty good experience, and high school too, as well.
And did you like going to school? Were you successful, or was it?
I threw away a lot of talent. I squandered away a lot of opportunities, and that was partly the reason I mentioned the girls in middle school because I never really had that attention in elementary, and I remember there were girls I had crushes on, and so when I got to middle school, I was getting a lot of attention. And when I got to high school, a lot of my energy was focused on basically being popular because I was popular amongst a lot of the girls in my high school, a lot of the guys. So I just threw away a lot of opportunities, that I should have been focused more on my academics.
I see. So how old were you when you were arrested and convicted of a crime?
I was 22 years old, turning 23.
Uh-huh. And how long was your sentence?
My sentence was 11 years. I ended up doing a little over 9.
I see. And I assume because you were in DC that you were convicted in a federal court.
Actually, and that's kind of like information that most people get confused on, because DC does have, you have the Superior Court,
Right,
in which all DC inmates go to federal prison. But
right,
then you also have your federal district court in DC.
right.
So I was in federal district court.
Uh-huh. And what is your current status?
I am currently on home confinement. I just left the halfway house about close to 2 weeks ago.
Uh-huh. And how long will the home confinement be? Do you know?
Until February 6th, February 8th.
February 8th. Then,
Right.
And then are you out for good, or you still have to check in? What are the conditions?
Well, I'm out as far as, being in custody. But at that point, I will start supervised release.
I see. And how long will that be for? Do you know?
5 years.
Oh my God.
So another 5 years of supervised release.
Wow.
Right. Now I'm very optimistic about that, based on from what a bunch of people have told me, was that, within a year or a little over a year, if you don't have any dirty urines, you go to work, you keep in good communication with your probation officer. This is what I've been told. I don't know. Usually they'll petition to have you removed from supervised release because there are so many people on their caseload. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's kind of like what I'm hoping for.
I see. Well, we'll see what the future holds on all those things.
Right.
So just moving in, we'd like to talk a little bit about what it was like to be in prison.
Okay.
Were you in one prison, or were you more than one prison? Things like that. And where were those prisons located?
Okay.
So where were you incarcerated?
Well, needless to say, I started off in DC jail. I was there for maybe 8 or 9 months. Well, actually, I don't know if everyone knows this, but DC jail is annexed.
Please mute those who are talking, please. Yeah, go ahead.
DC jail is annexed to a building called CTF, which is a low security private jail. So I spent half my time in DC jail and half my time in CTF.
I see. Yeah. People, it's been in the news lately, the distinction between the two. Yeah.
Right. And my experiences there, like, it was night and day. CTF had contact visits. They had a 7-page commissary list. They had late nights. It was just, I mean, considering, I guess, the juxtaposition from DC jail, it was, I saw people like literally hurt themselves because if you break an arm, a leg, or whatever, for some reason they send you to CTF. I saw people hurt themselves to go to CTF to get away from DC jail.
So CTF stands for Central Therapeutic Prison, I believe.
Right.
So, and what was the jail like then?
It was great. The environment and the culture was much different from DC jail. DC jail, you constantly felt as if you were in a maximum security building. And the crazy thing was, I wasn't even on like the maximum security floor. So, you have these huge electronic doors that makes all this noise when they close them. And I mean, then they have like a control center in the middle in the middle of the unit. So it's just, the whole setup just feels as if you are in maximum security, pinned down all the time. My first day in DC jail, someone got stabbed, like right in front of me. So it was that, going to CTF was like I said, night and day. The officers didn't sit in this control center; they just sit behind a desk. They didn't even have a computer. It was just much nicer, just all around. And they had a lot of programs in CTF, so drug program, library, education, stuff like that.
And in the jail, do you just think that the people were more, when you were there, just that much more dangerous, and that's why it was, rather than the people in CTF?
Well, I think it goes to people don't want to mess up an amenity. I think once you've made it to CTF, it's not necessarily that you become less violent, is that you just probably don't want to go back to DC jail. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was definitely violence in CTF, but it just wasn't the magnitude in which it was at the jail, because most people, almost everyone that I knew that was at CTF did not want to go back to DC jail at all. Like they not to say they feared it, they just, being able to hug your loved ones as opposed to, being on the phone behind this plexiglass. That within itself is worth it.
So after you served time here in the district, then where did you go? Where were you sent?
I was sent to Williamsburg, South Carolina, which is a medium high facility. I stayed there for about a little over 5 years. It wasn't bad, and I just want to make a point to this. My prison experience overall wasn't bad. I think it's just that some people get so caught up in these warped realities that they make it bad for themselves. Like if you just kind of sit down and be yourself and be respectful towards others, be humble, you're going to avoid a lot of confusion. But when you get outside of that bubble, then that's where like a lot of the issues come. Because like I said, I was in a medium high facility, so there's definitely, a lot of tension in the air, violence and the potential for violence. And it's constantly surrounding you.
And then you were in another prison as well, then.
Right. I was in Fort Dix in New Jersey.
How long were you there?
About 18 months.
I see. And then you went to Butner, right? Which is
last stop on the train, Butner, North Carolina.
And do you understand why you were transferred from one prison to another?
Well, actually, it's funny because I had got in such a groove and a routine in Williamsburg, and I had a really good job as far as prison jobs are concerned. I really didn't want to leave. I kind of just wanted to ride my time out there, and even my case manager tried to help me. It's just that my points had dropped so low, they could no longer legally keep me on that compound.
I see.
So from there, I went to Fort Dix, and I stayed for about 18 months.
Right. And why were we transferred out of Fort Dix?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I got in a little trouble in Fort Dix in regards to a cell phone. So, somebody asked me about the points. Whether it's points going so low? Yes. So prisons are. So you go to a prison based on your custody level, and that custody level is based on how many points you have. So, 24. Anything over 24 points, 24 points and over is a penitentiary. That's like, when you max security. 24 and lower, or 23 and lower, 23 to 15, that is medium security, and anything under 15 is low security. And I had dropped down to like 8 points.
I see. Wow. And what about, and the programming, were there any, what kind of programming was being offered to you during this time?
None really, to be honest with you. The programming was awful. When I was in South Carolina, I took a custodial maintenance program. That was offered to me because I was an orderly at the time. So they had these programs that were through the Department of Labor, and based on your employment, you could get like certified in that field. So if you were a plumber, you can get a plumber certification, or electrical, etc. So I took that, but even outside of that, there just wasn't a lot of like opportunities to really succeed in the world that we live in today. Not knocking a plumber or an electrician, but I don't feel like that should be like the cap for someone.
And did you get certified as a plumber or electrician?
I took I took and passed the custodial maintenance program. That took me about 2 years to complete. Like I said, I did it just because it was an opportunity available, and I thought it was a good program through the Department of Labor. But at the same time, I was also taking correspondence courses through Blackstone Career Institute, which they offered paralegal courses.
I see. So
that was not through the institution. That was not through the institution. That was something that my family had to pay for, and I had books sent in. So
I see. And they let you do that at least.
Oh, yes, sir.
So you took paralegal training in how to be a paralegal. Is that right?
Correct. I took a general course, which took me about a little over 2 years, and then I took an advanced course.
And do you think with that training, you could now go into the job market looking for a paralegal job?
I am currently working with some organizations in DC that help returning citizens finding job placement. I think I just want to get like all my bearings straight before I kind of like really dive deep and see what is available, because my movement is pretty restrictive right now.
Yes.
So I mean, I know as a paralegal, you have to be kind of flexible. I don't think it's particularly like a set schedule, like a 7 to 3 or 9 to 5. So I'm just exploring my options right now.
Well, you might find out that a lot of this you can do at home, with a computer. Are you allowed to have a computer now?
Yes, I'm actually in the process of obtaining a MacBook. So
I see. Cool. Well, good luck on all that. That's for sure. But you feel confident. I mean, I just that if it was offered to you, you could move into a paralegal job.
Right. I feel competent. I feel confident that obviously, my work experience is extremely limited. I did help a couple of guys with some medical malpractice cases while I was in prison, but that's the extent of my experience. So, I would definitely need to kind of study under someone or something to that extent.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I want to switch topics. Our organization is part of, we've been very engaged in this advocacy toward ending the abuse of prolonged isolation, or often called solitary confinement. So I was wondering if you were ever placed in solitary while you were in prison, if so, if you could describe that a bit.
I was placed in the SHU. My longest stay was for 3 months. And as you and I discussed before, the federal system doesn't not use, isolated solitary confinement to punish you. They punish you by putting you in a very small room with another individual for a very long period of time. And which I've known plenty of guys, myself included, that were begging to get out of the room and be by ourselves, just because of how you had to navigate living in such a small area with someone.
Yeah.
Those are some of the worst experiences.
And were you in this cell with this other person for like 20 some hours a day? Was in those kind of
No, 23 hours a day.
23 hours a day? Okay.
Some days, every day, especially if, you have your inconsistencies with the officers. They don't want to give the mandatory hour recreation. So, you might find yourself 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 6 days of being in a room with someone for all day.
Mm-hmm.
And that was torture to me. That was complete torture.
And what impact did it have on you or on other people that you were with?
Well, like everything else, you learn to navigate and you learn to do the best you can under the circumstances that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it was very mentally challenging because just being so sedentary, you find yourself not being able to fall asleep at night, not having much of an appetite, just feeling completely lethargic. And so I think those are like the worst effects that it had. You just feel bad all the time, just physically bad. The worst confinement that I have seen, and I will say this hands down, is going through transit.
Describe what that is, because people might not understand that.
So whenever you leave a prison, going to another prison, you have to transfer through the I guess the U.S. Marshals, and that, in my opinion, is the most inhumane, torturous system in the federal Bureau of Prisons, because you get chained up from head to toe, and it's long hours, it's long waits, it's sitting and standing in small room with 50 guys, 100 guys. But when you finally get to your destination, because a lot of places are not necessarily like holdover spots or transit spots, and what I mean by that is, some places kind of give you like the leeway of not being in the cell, but you're not really a part of that prison either. So it's like they made like a special unit for guys going through transit. But a place like Petersburg, Virginia, they don't have that. That doesn't exist. So everyone going through transit, for example, if I was coming from up north going down to a prison down south, you would have to lay over in Petersburg, and you might find yourself there for a week. And the worst thing about Petersburg, which is to me just complete torture, is that you are placed in a room smaller than the rooms that I've already described with 2 other guys. So now it's 3 guys in a room. So you have 3 bunks stacked, on each other, on top of each other. The top bunk is so high to the ceiling, and when I went there, it was kind of hot. And Petersburg doesn't have air conditioning.
Yeah.
So that was the most miserable experience I've ever had in my life. The toilets only flush every like 5 or 10 minutes. So now you're trying to navigate, taking a shower or using the restroom with 2 other guys. And when someone takes a shower, the steam fills up the room. So, oh man, it was awful. It was awful.
Hmm. And when you transferred, you were taken by a bus? Is that
correct? The bus most of the time, or depends on where you're going, you go by plane. Always by bus though. So you might have to take a bus to get to the airport.
I see.
So it's always me by bus.
So when from New Jersey to North Carolina, did you fly down, or were you how did that happen? Curious.
What happened was I went from New Jersey, I went to Philadelphia, FTC Philadelphia.
I see.
I stayed there for about 3 or 4 days. And from Philadelphia, we drove down to Petersburg. I stayed there for another 4 days. And from Petersburg, I went to North Carolina.
I see. And I assume, and when you're on the bus, you're shackled?
Completely shackled. The shackle is around your waist, connected to your ankles and your wrists.
Okay.
Very, very uncomfortable.
Prison authorities often state that the deployment of isolation, either singularly or with another person, is essential to maintaining security in a prison. How would you respond to that claim?
That's a tough question, because of the dynamics that you're dealing with prison individuals and people. Sometimes you have to put somebody away, so to speak. I can't say that I'm strongly opinionated on it because I've seen people do very dangerous things. I've seen people do very foolish things in prison, very dubious and questionable things, disgusting things, and and I think we're just being frank and being honest. You have some inmates who sexually harass the female officers. You know, whether it be by comments or lewd gestures or something else, and it's the question is like, okay, so what do you do with this guy?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a balancing act, though. I know that they overuse that tool. I do know that. That's almost like their first line of defense of wanting to put someone in the shoe. I do think for certain offenses, someone needs to be placed in solitary or in a room with someone else, until they can kind of investigate and find out, okay, what happened, what went wrong. But for other things, I don't think it's necessary. Like I said, I've seen people threaten, myself included, to be thrown in the shoe for just almost nothing.
Yeah. And SHU, by the way, is Special Housing Unit. That's what it stands for.
Oh, correct.
It's one of the many euphemisms they use for solitary. That's
right.
Right. Restrictive housing, special housing unit are often the terms that are used.
Right.
You have written that you've seen a lot of injustice and fallacies in the prison system. So I was wondering if you could take a few minutes just to describe what you meant by that, by the injustices and fallacies.
It's a system in which recidivism is their job security. And what I mean by that is I was so blessed to actually step out of myself at one point. I remember I woke up one day after like 2 years in prison, right? And I woke up and I said, what have I accomplished? Because there's a routine that the prison has created that most people are not aware of doing things that are not productive, doing things that will not help you. And I've seen it firsthand and with others. If you do anything that tries to show progress, you try to go to school, you try to do the right things, then you get met with a lot of blowback. You get met with a lot of resistance
from the staff.
Mm-hmm. And to me, that is a huge letdown because the whole system is supposed to be built on, corrective behavior. The whole system is supposed to be built on people acquiring the skills they need to re-enter society successfully. But the people that I've seen, the people that I know, all those people who have tried to do those things always get met with the most resistance. So it's definitely not a system designed. Well, it's designed, and on paper it says that it helps people, but in reality and in practice it doesn't. It does the exact opposite of that. Because in actuality, all those prison jobs that they have, they really are just cheap labor to run the prison. It's not a means of you bettering yourself or putting yourself in a position where you can get X, Y, and Z. It's it's only to sustain this building. The grass needs to be cut because when the corporate brass comes down from Washington, D.C., they want to see a nice looking prison. When the staff comes down from Washington, D.C., the culture changes in the prison system for us for a negative, because now everything becomes an infraction. So they go out of their way to make sure the grass is cut, the trees are trimmed. They want to make sure that this week in particular, that the best meals are cooked. They put up flyers and signs. They're putting on a facade to show the public, or not the public, but their bosses, the higher ups, that they're actually doing what their mission statement says. But that's not the reality. It's just a ruse. When it's all said and done and those people are gone, it goes back to business as usual. And we're still stuck with, inadequate programming, to almost no programming. We're stuck with not having resources, access to resources. So it's a system designed for you to sit down, watch TV, play chess, play spades. That's all. It's a system designed for you to stay there, like a big daycare, and they don't want you to leave.
Yeah. I'm going to ask, I think, one more question, and then I'll open up for questions from the audience. And if you'd like, you could, raise your hand under the reactions, and I can call on you if you have a question. I just ask that you make it be more of a question, not a long statement. Henry, you've written about you have a deep faith in God.
Correct.
You could share something of your faith, and if you identify with the religious community and how that came about.
Oh, absolutely. I do identify as Jewish. And I would say, to give a short version of the story, I do believe it was by divine providence how I really came into the faith, because when I was in the medium security prison, I was moved in with a group called Pisces, and I don't know if everyone's familiar with that group, but it's basically like a Mexican. They don't classify themselves as a gang, but it.
Oops. We think we just lost him. I think we just lost him, actually. He'll be back. Okay, hope so. See if he's. Here he comes. Here he is, about. Are you back, Henry?
I'm sorry about that. I did get a call, and I tried to decline it, and it went through for some reason. I do apologize.
No problem.
Yes,
you were talking about your faith, yeah.
Yes, sir. And what ended up happening was there were some problems with the room, and I ended up meeting a Jewish guy which at the time I didn't know he was Jewish. He said, "Hey, man, you can come stay with me if you're having issues with them," because the Pisces, they were very controlling about the rooms, and who they want moved in those rooms. So when I moved in a room with this guy, we didn't even really talk about religion, but one day he just pulled out these books and he started talking to me about the Torah and God's word, and he started pointing out things to me that I'd never seen before, and it was amazing. It was an eye opener. So from there, I got really, really invested in the faith. I studied. I taught myself how to read Hebrew. I learned how to speak some Hebrew. It was like an everyday waking dedication to God and the Torah and the Jewish people. And I'm so very happy because that was something that really sustained me through my prison system because, you know, going to New Jersey, there was a huge Jewish population. And so it was such a sense of belonging and pride to walk down the compound and see people wearing it's called tzitzit, but they're like tassels,
Right.
and the yarmulke. And even when I got to Butner, North Carolina, even though there wasn't nowhere near the size of that population in Jersey, it was still a very close-knit community. So I'm very happy. I've been going to synagogue every weekend since I've been out. I'm so happy that I'm in this faith.
Uh-huh. And how many people are in in Butner? How many Jewish people were in the Jewish community there? Would you say?
When I arrived at Butner, maybe 5 like really active participants.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Something. Okay, I think I'm going to pause with my questions and open it up to other to people. I guess I see Bill raising his hand. There is if you know, under reactions below, if you can just hit the raise hand function too, that would be helpful for me to, easier for me to see people. So, but Bill Saint, please go ahead.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Henry, for being so open and forthcoming about your experience. It's a world that many of us know nothing about, and we should know more about it. So thank you for that. I wanted to ask you if you could say a little bit more about the role of religion in prison and the extent to which religious representatives, you know, priests or ministers or imams interact with prisoners, and what kind of activities and what kind of support they might provide to you, if any.
Great question. Well, when I was in South Carolina, you know, there wasn't a lot of, I guess, that diversity there. And the Jewish community in South Carolina really consisted of me and another guy. So I would say the bulk of the people that were in was Muslim or Christian. So, you know, they had a lot of representation, a lot of help, a lot of support. When it came to other groups such as Buddhist, Jewish, Wiccan, Yoruba, there wasn't a lot of support. And actually, during my time in South Carolina, I actually never got a chance to see a rabbi. A rabbi was never came down, and that prison was just so far out of the way. And there were opportunities for the chaplain to reach out, but it was, I guess this culturally, it was something they couldn't really grasp, because when I was in South Carolina, I was like harassed almost on a daily basis for wearing my Jewish apparel. So by the time I got to Fort Dix, it was in New Jersey, it was a much more diverse, compound. You had a lot of everyone. So there was plenty of representation from all groups. There were imams coming, there were rabbis. I'm really not sure what Buddhist leadership is called, but they were coming to the prison. Meals were being provided. It was a great experience. By the time I got to North Carolina, that was actually probably my worst religious experience I'd ever had. There was a chaplain there, and he went out of his way to make people of faith miserable. He probably had the smallest congregation of a chaplain that I'd ever seen. Every single person, or people in different faith groups, had a negative opinion of him. It was awful. It was awful. That in North Carolina was the worst, by far the worst. Actually, I'm actually writing an article for the Washington Post trying to bring some light to that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, Deborah
Thank you very
Roy.
much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And Deborah Roy has her hand up. So Deborah.
Oops. Yeah, here I am. Hi.
Hey, good evening.
Hi, Harry, thanks for talking to us. This is really helpful. I think you mentioned caseworker in prison earlier. Does each prisoner have a caseworker or someone who works with them directly or is an advocate for them? Or if a family member is concerned about their inmate, is there someone for them to contact? I'm just trying to understand what the caseworker function is. Thank you.
Okay, so you have a caseworker and you have a counselor. The caseworker handles things pertaining to your case, so to speak. So whatever special needs or conditions that you have, based on whatever crime you committed, and also they do like all the filing. So in my case, as I was saying, that when my security custody had dropped, the case managers are the ones to make sure that you are in the right location based on your custody level. They are also the people that you go to through trying to obtain different legal services, like if you have anything pending in court, any detainers, they're the people that help you. And the problem with that is sometimes you have good case managers, ones that can really go out of their way to help and do the best they can. But the problem is you have so many inmates assigned to one case manager. You might have 1, 2, maybe 3, depending on the location, per unit, that is. And the job, and I want to say this is because I believe this is pertinent. The job that I had, I was the orderly for the case manager in my unit. So because of that, I was constantly back in the office cleaning. And over time, I could see how even a good case manager could become kind of isolated and more abrasive, because I saw a lot of guys that would come back there daily with the same complaint, but not even like grave complaints, just very small complaints, and she would respond by saying, hey, we just talked about that yesterday. Like, I told you when something changes, I'll get with you. And I can't imagine going through that day in and day out for years, over and over and over again. So it's a system, like I said, where it's too many people in prison and not enough workers to handle the load.
Yeah, it's what's common is that the prisons are woefully understaffed, state prisons, federal prisons. People, just don't, they have a very hard time filling the positions that are funded, that are in their budget. And often those positions are not sufficient to meet the demand of the needs of the people incarcerated.
Right.
More questions for Henry? Any more questions for Henry? Boy. Bill again, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious, Henry, could you sort of run us through what an average day is like for somebody in prison from wake up to sundown?
Okay. And it's tough because, it really depends on the person. But I would say that the same schedule kind of applies to everyone, more or less. The first thing you're awoken with is something called pill line and insulin line. And that happens right before breakfast, which is maybe like between 6 and 6:30 in the morning. So they get all those guys. And the reason that is because I think certain medications you have to take before food. And a lot of those guys, they're on crutches and canes and wheelchairs, and it takes them longer to get to their destination. So it is a pretty loud announcement. So it pretty much wakes everyone up. From there, it's breakfast. And breakfast starts like around 6:50, 7 o'clock, and it lasts for about 30, 40 minutes. After that, like around 7:45, you have all your work calls. So if you're a plumber, if you work in the Unicore factory, electrical, whatever, you go to work. And if you don't go to work, then none of that stuff applies to you. You could sleep in, you could work out, you can go outside. So like I said, it really it depends on what you do in your schedule. Between 10:45 and 11 o'clock, that's when they have lunch. After lunch, they do a second work call. And usually they do something called a yard recall, like around 3:30, 3:45. That's when everyone is assigned to come back to their housing unit, to get prepared for the 4 o'clock count, in which if you are in a medium security, you have to go to your rooms, get locked in, and they'll count you, and that usually takes about 30, 40 minutes. And from there, so that clears like around 4:45. From there, they do something called the 5-minute recreation move. So usually when you do the 5-minute recreation move, you can go to rec a lot early, up to an hour earlier. But the trade-off is that you are not allowed to go to dinner, because lunch and dinner are based on your unit score. And your unit score is based on how clean your unit is, based on their weekly walk-arounds for safety. So if they feel as though that your unit is very clean, then you'll be the first unit to go to lunch, the very dirty last unit to go to lunch. So if you go out to the recreation move, you go out there before they even start chow. So they kind of made it in a way in which they don't want you going to chow and circumventing their order. And from there, recreation is called back in like at 8:30, or if you're at another job site, 8:30. And in the medium security prisons, you lock down like around 9:30, 9:45. That's it for the night. You don't come out anymore. If you were lucky enough to be in a cell that is in front of a TV, you can watch TV for the rest of the night. That depends on what was left on the TV before you went in. And if you are in a low security prison, then you can stay out as late as 11:30. I can't remember. I think it's like 11:30 though.
What was the food like? Did it vary much?
Well, I ate kosher. So for about 8 years, I ate basically frozen dinner that was heated up in the microwave. But from what I was told from everyone else there were so many people that offered to buy my meals, on a daily basis, because I guess it was so much better than what they were eating. So I can't really speak too much on what everyone else was eating, but I know that there was often complaints about it. Sometimes there were compliments, but more often than not, there were complaints.
Mm-hmm. And I guess one more, that's kind of in the same line. What was medical care like? Did you have any experience with that, or did you witness and have a sense of that?
I did. I actually, I re-tore my ACL in prison. I had tore it while I was home. I was younger. I was like 18, and I was playing soccer, and I re-tore it. And actually, they did an MRI. It took them a year to give me an MRI. When I injured my knee, I knew that I had re-torn my ACL because I remember how it felt the first time. Like I said, it took them a year to give me an MRI, and after they gave me the MRI, it was like 3 weeks later. They told me the results, and they said, "Hey, yeah, you just have like, a slight tear, nothing to be worried about for real." And actually, I didn't find out this till years later. That not only was my ACL torn, but the meniscus on both sides of my right knee was torn.
Mm.
And the lady scolded me for saying that you should have known that. You should have read the x-rays and the MRI yourself. And I said, well, ma'am, I'm not a doctor. So yeah, the healthcare was inadequate. There were a couple of healthcare personnel here or there that really cared and tried to help, but the overall experience was bad. It was really bad.
Sharon and then Elizabeth. Sharon first.
Hi, thanks for sharing with us. I was wondering if you could explain when the 23 hours in the cell time occurred. How often did that happen to you? And did the prison make it seem like it was COVID related or not?
Okay, so whenever you go to the special housing unit for disciplinary, pre, post, during COVID, it's always going to be 23 hours in one. And I don't know how long that's been implemented. I would assume that that's been that way for many years. So that's just their standing rule that, if you're in the shoe, even if it's for protective custody, if you go to the special housing unit in federal prison for protective custody, you're going through transit, or if it's disciplinary, it's going to be 23 in one. 23 hours lockdown, 1 hour recreation. And as I said earlier, the problem is, even with the recreation, that's all dependent upon, what staff is working that housing unit that day, and are they in a good mood? Did someone say something that upset them? And they can just give these arbitrary reasons for not giving rec at all. So you find yourself, like I said, on a 2 to 6 day stretch of just being in the room for 24 hours a day.
Okay. And Liz?
Yeah, hi. Henry, I was just wondering if you could please expand on that point system again, like who is doing those assessments, how often, and what are the factors that are being considered? What incentives do you have to bring your points down? How does that work?
Okay. And I don't want to classify myself as an expert in that field, but to the best of my knowledge, it's a system that is based out of Grand Prairie, Texas. Whatever they do there, their sole responsibility is for classification and making sure people are in the right spots, and they are responsible for actually sending you to a prison that they deem appropriate based on your crime, length of sentence, prison history, if you have any. And the incentives are, for example, if you go to school, if you have a high school diploma or GED, these are all incentives to lower your points, and you can eventually make your way to from a penitentiary to a medium to a low, and to a low into a camp. So that's the best way I can explain it. That's like all the knowledge I really have in that area.
Sure, thanks. But do you have any sense of how often that's being reviewed, or?
And it depends on the case manager. It's supposed to be, I want to say that it's supposed to, you get a biannual or annual review, okay. But I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's a biannual review of what you're doing, programmings, things like that.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think I want to thank Henry so much for taking time to talk to us and to share some of his experiences with us. So big hand for him.
Thank you.
And Henry, you're invited. You're certainly welcome to stay if you like. We're going to have a little meeting of our pen pals.
Okay.
Who write to people in federal prisons, actually, mostly DC residents. And so we try to meet twice a year as a group, and to share if issues come up in their correspondence that they like to get some share with the other members of the group, and the group serves as a sounding board that way. So
okay.
So please, if you'd like to stay, feel free. And I open up now to and again, thank you so much. And I'm going to stop the recording for a moment.